Question number 13 on the reading portion of College Board's Test 5. In passage 1, Beecher implies that women's effect on public life is largely overlooked because few men are interested in women's thoughts about politics. Okay, so what does Beecher imply, or like what does she really want you to believe, or what does she really want you to internalize after reading her piece? You know what? She didn't say it, but she was heavily implying it, or heavily alluding to it. Women's effect on public life is largely overlooked because few men are interested in women's thoughts. Again, you might think that that's true based on what she said, or based on the time period this is from. You said, yeah, women they were overlooked because men, didn't care about what women thought. That might be true. However, is that what Beecher thinks about women's effect on public life? She never once says women are ignored because men don't care about what women have to say or think. She never says that. She never once says that. I'm not a fan of this because of the way that it's trying to get into our mind to believe like, oh, this is that narrative that we need. That, if a woman is writing about this time and she is fully on board with this equality, the equality train and all this kind of stuff for the time. Not necessarily. Remember, history has a lot of crazy things that happen in it, and we can't assume that everyone believes one thing or another during times. In passage 1, Beecher implies that women's effect on public life is largely indirect. B. Indirect means not direct. Because women exert their influence within the home and the family. Maybe. Because what does she say? This is what I remember in the piece. Doesn't she say all the time, women win everything by peace and love, by making herself respected, right? And it says that when you do this, when you are unassuming and unambitious, the fathers, the husbands, and the sons will find an influence thrown around them to which they will yield not only willingly but proudly. So this is saying then that women don't do the things that men do, like is said in the second paragraph. Women don't do things coercively or forcefully by the collision of intellect. She only deals with kindly, generous, peaceful, and benevolent principles, line 20 and 21. So as a result, you can argue that her sphere, which is domestic, and it's within the home, within the family, is how women influence things, not through the traditional means of influence that men use. So maybe you can argue that it's implied that that woman's effect is indirect. It's not a direct collision, but it's indirect through love and compassion and things like that. Because women exert their influence within the home and family. It's a different sphere of influence, maybe. Let's see. Unnecessary. Beecher implies that women's effect on public life is largely unnecessary because men are able to govern society by themselves. That's taking the argument to the other extreme by latching on to what she says in the beginning, that women hold a subordinate relation, and you're saying immediately like, oh, okay, so she just thinks that women should just not do anything, let men take care of everything. That's, again, another extreme. That's not exactly what she's saying. And furthermore, does she ever say that it's unnecessary? Oh, it's unnecessary for women to be involved in public life because men are able to govern society by themselves. She never says that. She never says that women are, unnecessary in the public sphere. She just says women exert their influence in different ways. Not saying that, well, it doesn't even matter because it doesn't, who cares? She doesn't say that. What about D? Beecher implies that women's effect on public life is largely symbolic because women tend to be more idealistic about politics than men are. This is another one of these answers that you're answering this probably based on your own personal bias rather than what was actually said in the passage. Does she ever, this is a good, almost like symbolic, like this is a good word that's like an English class answer. So you don't quite know what it means, but it sounds good. And then, I don't know what that means, that it's symbolic, but she never says it's just symbolic. And then, let's read a little bit more, because women tend to be more idealistic about politics. When does she ever say that? That last part doesn't make any sense. It's definitely not D. It's not C, that's a pretty extreme thing. She's like, leave men alone, they'll figure it out. She doesn't say that. She says women exert their influence differently, and that women's influence is just as significant of a role as men's influence, even though women hold a subordinate station in society. And again, we go back to A, why A can't be right. It's not overlooked. It's not saying that it's overlooked. She says that it's indirect. Beecher argues that this sphere of influence, appropriate offices of piety, charity, maternal, and domestic duty, this is her appropriate sphere. And this is how women influence. Not directly like men do, but rather indirectly. The answer number 13 is going to be B.